the WMSCOG debate, tithes and offerings. World Mission Society Church of God teaches its members to pay tithes in the form of money, as do many Sunday worship churches and other mainstream churches. Let's see if that's accurate with Scripture. Let's turn to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verse 22, and we'll read through verse 29. I'll be reading from the King James Version. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 says, "Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, that the field bringeth forth year by year." Verse 23, "And thou shalt eat," that's EAT, "and thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always." Verse 24, "And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee," verse 25, "then shalt thou turn it into money." Let me read that again. Verse 25, "Then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose." Now let's see what they were to do with this money. Verse 26, "And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth. And thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household." The tithe was not money, ladies and gentlemen. It was food. And the only time when the Most High God told you to turn it into money is if the place where you had to take your tithe, where God put his name, was so far away that you could not carry all of your cattle and fruit and oxen and sheep. So you would turn it into money, and when you get close enough to where the temple or where the Most High's name is, then you would use that money to buy food again, because the Most High did not want your money. He wanted your food as a tithe. And in verse 26, it says, "And thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household." That means you and your house were supposed to rejoice, and you were supposed to sit down and eat of the tithe yourself. Now let's get to verse 27. "And the Levite that is within thy gates, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee." The Levite was the priest. That's who the tithe was for. The sons of Levi, meaning actual Levites of the tribe of Israel known as Levi. Verse 28, At the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. Verse 29, "And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest." Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 29 said that the tithe is for you and your household first. You eat a part of it. And it's especially for the Levite, which is the Levitical or Levite priest, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. When the children of Israel received the promised land of Canaan, the Levites did not receive land. They received the work of the tabernacle or the work of the temple. And so their inheritance was the tithe in doing the priestly work of the Most High. And the tithe is also for the stranger, meaning the foreigners who may live among you, who may need food, and also the fatherless and the widow, which are within thy gates. The fatherless, or some versions of the Bible may call it orphans, but the fatherless and the widow, an older woman whose husband has died, may need food as well. That's who the tithe is for. Food, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's turn to James chapter 1, verse 27. You might wonder what James has to do with tithes. Well, let's see. Most people don't go to James when they're talking about tithes. But I noticed something about the way James wrote in the King James Version. James chapter 1, verse 27. It says, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. James, Apostle James told us if we want to have pure religion, we should visit the fatherless and widows. Could he by chance be meaning we should visit them with our tithe and offering of food? Just some food for thought. No pun intended. So, does Church of God give anything to the poor? Or do they do it for a show on news segments and on certain events they have where they pretend to care for the poor, but actually it's the members themselves coming up with the money? The church does absolutely nothing for the poor. You can talk to members when we do these cleanups. They try to hurry up and put the food up when homeless people walk up. If a homeless person comes up while they're preaching, they'll make sure that they try to put the food up before they get there. Is that what Jesus Christ did 2,000 years ago? Or the one they call Jesus Christ, I'll put it as that. You see what I'm saying? I don't think so. So, again, they will try to refute this and pretend that tithing is money. But rest assured, you will not see that tithe is money in the Bible. It is food. Now, let's get Malachi chapter 3. Because this is the verse that all the churches love to quote from. Keep in mind, Malachi chapter 3 is the Old Testament still under the law of Moses, which these churches say is done away with. So if the law of Moses is done away with, why do you lying churches still teach Malachi 3? It's because you are greedy dogs who just want to get money out of poor people's pockets that you don't give back to them and help them as the Bible said you're supposed to. The tithes are supposed to be for the poor, the fatherless, and the widows. Not churches buying flat screen TVs and doing remodeling every 2-3 months. And building temple and church after church after church while the houses in the neighborhood that are paying for the churches are poor. Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. So this is what they love to read. But let's keep going. Verse 9. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Notice that nation means the nation of Israel. Verse 10. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat. Not Benjamin Franklin's meat. Not George Washington's meat. Not dollar bills, meat, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Now let's get to verse 11. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, saith the Lord of hosts. This tithe is talking about meat, which is food, the same food that you saw in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 through 29, which is meant to feed the fatherless and the widows. Okay? Now, let's see if Jesus Christ says the same thing. Let's see if he said tithes was food or if it was money. Here's another verse that the World Mission Society Church of God loves to use in order to get money from poor people that they will never get back, nor will they see any blessings poured out from the windows of heaven. Matthew chapter 23, verse 23. This is Jesus Christ's own words. He said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. For ye pay tithe, right? For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. He said they pay tithe of mint, anise, and cumin. Or the NIV says mint, dill, and cumin. Mint, anise, and cumin are herbs. Food, ladies and gentlemen. Why didn't Christ say, pull out your dollar bills and give it to me? Some of you will pretend that they didn't have money back then. Yes, they did, because Deuteronomy chapter 14, he told you if the journey is too far, turn it into money. And when you get close to the temple where the priests are, where you can pay the tithe, then buy food with that money and pay your tithe in food. God does not need your money. And World Mission Society Church of God will ask you the question sarcastically. Do you think God needs your money? I say no. But my question is, why are they asking for it? I know God don't need it, but you need it to buy flat screen TVs and stuff for your churches that you're building all over the place at the expense of the members. You don't pay for anything and you don't help the poor. You are liars. You do good deeds on television that are false deeds. You understand? And while I'm at it, the church in Denver, I believe the pastor out there is named Pastor Park, his last name. I want to say Daniel Park. Forgive me if I didn't say his first name correctly, but I believe it's Pastor Daniel Park. But I know his last name is Park. They did some sort of relief project for the Hurricane Sandy victims when that happened. And I'll get some more details on that for you later. But the Hurricane Sandy victims, lost everything in that disaster. And so they raised about 1,300 coats. People were bringing coats for the people. So I guess when it's cold outside, when you lost everything, a coat can be very, very beneficial, right? So the Church of God in Denver did some sort of volunteer activity, and they gathered 1,300 coats. So that's good, right? I mean, no problem with that. And when I heard about it, I was like, okay, that's good. But no, because after the event was over, they didn't even send the coats to the victims. They kept the 1,300 coats in the church. And one brother who had a truck and a trailer offered to carry it to the victims. And the Pastor Park said, no, don't worry about it. So in front of the news media, they pretend like they were doing a good deed for Hurricane Sandy victims. But in actuality, they didn't even send the coats to the people that they collected. So you wasted those people's efforts and their money because those coats were not free. How much does it cost to buy 1,300 coats? You do the math. If it was only $10 a coat, that's $13,000. If it's $50 a coat, you're looking at about $65,000. So that is wrong. And this church is notorious for pretending like they care about the poor when they actually do not. So tithes are not money. They are food. And even if you collected the tithes in money and you use it to feed the poor, even that might be a good thing. But you don't do that either. Okay? Now, Melchizedek. I'm going to deal with his tithes next, because they love to bring up Melchizedek. But if you read the chapter about Melchizedek, and I'll do another video on that, when Melchizedek paid tithes, or a tenth of the spoils, not money, but the goods, the spoils that he took from King Chedorlaomer in that battle, he gave that 10% to Melchizedek. But guess what he did with the other 90%? He gave that away too. That's right, Abraham gave away 100% of the goods and spoils of war that he took from King Chedorlaomer. So the 10% that he gave to Melchizedek, he didn't even need that. He didn't even need those goods to be rich, because Abraham was already rich. So when they tell you if you're Abraham's seed, you should do what Abraham did, maybe you should get rich like Abraham too. Abraham didn't take food out of him and Sarah's mouth, okay? He gave a tenth of spoils of war that he didn't even need to become rich, because he was already wealthy.